Hello, my YouTube members. Tonight, this evening is another episode. Is the 11th episode of the show of the Enlightenment and Higher Consciousness. Today's my favorite subject is the military. I should have done this episode earlier, during the first time I started this series, but there were other subjects that were equally important. In the military, but finally, what's the old saying? Better late than ever. I will say I want to say a few things. I want to bring to your attention certain issues before I start with this subject. One, I'm not claiming to be an expert in the military, despite the fact that I'm a veteran. Number two, when I discuss the issue of the military, it will be about all branches. Every branch of service will be discussed. In other words, I will talk about the military as an institution, and it will be about every branch more or less, very briefly, including my own, the U.S. Navy. But it will not just be about the United States military. It will be in reference to all militaries around the world. It will be very brief. I will not get too much into it. The subtitles will be as follows: What is the military? A brief history of the military. The present condition of the U.S. military, because that concerns me the most. I might mention a few other nations involved. Let me see. I will also discuss my military experience and advice for young people joining the military. Before I begin, I want to thank, and this is only for people who served in the U.S. military. I want to thank every person that has ever served, whoever served in the U.S. military, whether they were actively serving or active reservists, or who are veterans, or who unfortunately paid the ultimate sacrifice and gave their life for their country. So again, I thank every person who has ever served, regardless of whatever branch they served, that is serving actively now, either actively on active duty or in reserves, that have paid, or that is a veteran, disabled veteran, or just a veteran, and who unfortunately paid the ultimate sacrifice, who have died in combat. And regardless if you served in peacetime or you were a combat veteran, regardless of whatever branch. So I'm going to I generally don't like using Wikipedia, but a lot of people denounce Wikipedia because Wikipedia is not very reliable. Obviously, that's not in fact. That is not necessarily a fact. It is about 70% accurate, and they're constantly upgrading it, so it's pretty good. There are better sources, but for the purposes of this subject, the Wikipedia explains the subject of the military pretty correctly. So we're going to start with what is the military. I don't need to use Wikipedia, or I might borrow a few sentences from Wikipedia, but being that I was in the military, I obviously know what the military is. I'm going to be very brief with it. A military is also known collectively as armed forces, is a heavily armed, highly organized force primarily intended for warfare. It makes a lot of sense. It is typically authorized and maintained by a sovereign state, with its members identified by their district military uniform. It may consist of one or more military branches, such as an army, Navy, Air Force, Space, well, Marines, and Coast Guard. And recently they have established a new branch of service called the Space Force, which may have already existed unofficially for years, but now they're making it official. They've always had weapons in space, even during the Cold War. And the main task of the military is usually that I will always interject if I think that there's something that may not be correct. I will, I just wanted to let you know that. The main task of the military is usually defined as a defense of the state and its interests against external and armed threats, and also political and economic interests, which is the part they don't mention. But and I don't need to get too much into this. The first recorded use of the word military in English, militari, was in 1582. It comes from the Latin militaris, from Latin milis, meaning soldier, though through French, but it is of uncertain etymology. One suggestion being derived from milit, going in a body or mass. The use of force, basically. The science of defeating another military, and the tactics and weapons, design philosophies, and military strategies used to defeat another military. And I'll go briefly, I don't want to get too much into the history. Military history. Okay, now we're going to go into a brief history of the military. I might use Wikipedia a little bit, but I will include my own understanding of it. I will provide some information of my own. Military history is often considered to be the history of all conflicts, not just the history of state militaries. It differs somewhat from the history of war, with military history focused on people and institutions of war making, while the history of war focused on the evolution of war itself in the face of changing technology, governments, and geography. Military history has a number of facets. One main facet is to learn from the past accomplishments and mistakes so as to more effectively wage war in the future. Another is to create a sense of military tradition, which is used to create cohesive military forces. Still, another may be to learn to prevent wars more effectively. Human knowledge about the military is largely based on both record of oral history, their participating armies and navies, and more recently air forces. Now, this is my take. Throughout human history, since the first humans evolved approximately 200,000 years ago, and some people debate, some people say from Africa. I think that humans evolved everywhere simultaneously. The multi-regional theory, Neanderthals interbreeded with archaic Africans from Africa, and so they were already living in Europe. I think that Neanderthals should be considered one species, and archaic Africans, because they interbreeded, were probably of the same species, but I don't want to get into the anthropological aspect of that. Wherever man, after that, up until about the beginning of prehistoric times, Paleolithic, 100,000 years ago till about 10,000 years ago, and then the Mesolithic, and then the Neolithic, which is probably up until about 7,000 years ago, which is 5,000 BC. Man has always been a violent species, but we are no different from animals. Animals have have the habit of fighting wars. Certain apes and primates, chimpanzees would fight in groups, wolf packs, wolves. So it is part of the human condition. It is part of human evolution, and it's part of biological evolution. As a matter of fact, many of our forms of warfare are based from the animal kingdom. The concept of wearing camouflage, like what I'm wearing right now, comes from the animal kingdom. Certain lizards will blend in with a tree, and you wouldn't be able to see it until it's too late, or either to attack you or to evade you. In this case, a small lizard, a gecko, I think, can blend in with a tree and just become looking like a branch, and you wouldn't be able to see it. So camouflage is a military strategy that comes from the animal world, actually, from the as far as humans can remember, people have fought for resources, for political gain. I mean, for territory, for women, for whatever reason, economics, wealth, resources, and the first, I guess, branch of service was the army, I guess, and the only form of warfare that was infantry warfare, which is basically men fighting, basically with their fists. But then someone got the idea they can pick up a rock and throw it, and that was the beginning of ballistics. The concept that you don't have to go at your enemy directly, that you can hit him with a rock, and that was the beginning. This was around 5,000, maybe even longer than that, 10,000. As far back as 50,000 years ago. Violence is not symmetrical. It is not consistent, but it is consistent enough, and it has existed in every continent. Sometimes, when there were enough resources, people would cooperate, but sometimes when they weren't, war would happen. People would fight. Sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad, and then certain groups would combine to form bigger groups, and then some groups would fight other groups, and then the first empires appeared, and and that's how it. The ancient Sumeria, the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the the Babylonians, and the first empires began to run. Then later Rome and Greece. I don't want to get too much into it, but. And the army was the first branch of service, and then later cavalry. They began to realize that the horse can be very effective. It can get you, it can transport infantry or transport goods, cavalry, And then later on, people realized, I don't know when this actually happened. I think it was possibly, in my opinion, the Sumerians, maybe, or possibly. It was definitely in the Middle East that the first boats may have appeared. Sumerian boats, maybe the Babylonians might have gotten, and they later on Rome developed a navy, conquered the Mediterranean, North Africa, and fighting with, going to war with the Carthage. There were naval battles, but they were mostly, their strategy was very basic. It was to board the other ship or to attack amphibious, and that was the beginning of amphibious warfare, using soldiers on ships. That was the prerequisite to the Marines that we have in the United States, and naval infantry in other nations. Other nations don't have Marines; they call them naval infantry force, like the Russians and the French, which is the same principle, the same or type of organization, just a different name. And they would just simply be on a ship, land in a particular target, and then disembark, come ashore, and attack. And they began to. That's the beginning of the Army and the Navy. Army being the first branch of service, and then later the Navy. As soon as the ships became more modernized, the Phoenicians, I think, were the really first ones who were into shipping. And it isn't a coincidence that wherever they went and they introduced their technology, that region prospered in maritime technology. So the Phoenicians would travel to Spain, Iberian Peninsula, which later became Spain, and then later England and France. And it isn't a coincidence that Spain ended up becoming a naval empire, later France, and then later England. So wherever the Phoenicians went, they brought their maritime technology. They were the first ones who invented shipping. They built boats. That's just coming back to me now. Yes, the Phoenicians were highly seafaring peoples, and that's one reason why Spain became a powerful empire very quickly. And if you look at the ancient documents or historical books on history about Spain, you would notice that the Phoenicians migrated to Spain in 2000 BC. That's 4,000 years ago. and they settled mostly in the southern region. As a matter of fact, Cadiz was founded by the Phoenicians. Anyway, so then later on, new forms of warfare around 15th century, 16th century. Boats were bigger, more stronger, faster, wind power mostly, until around the 19th century, although some people claim it was Velasco de Garay, a Spaniard who came up with the concept of boiling water, a steamboat. But it was the English who took the credit for building the first steam engine. And so they began to liberate themselves from wind power and get more into, to begin to adopt the steam engine. And it was a slow process of centuries. From the 15th century to the 19th century, it took 400 years to master this, being free, independent from the wind power. But in between that period, there was a little bit of improvements, better sails, better ships. There were different designs. Some were built for speed, some were built for different design philosophies of shipbuilding. Spanish ships were basically more slower, but they can carry more weapons. They can go out longer in the ocean. That's why most of the discoveries were made by the Spanish. Magellan died just crossing the prime meridian, but it was Sebastián del Cano who eventually went all around the world, and eventually sailed and landed back to Spain. He went from Spain and landed and sailed all around the world and landed back into Spain. Magellan died along the process in the Polynesian, I believe, islands. So it was basically the Army and Navy, and as new weapons created, new forms of warfare were created. Weapons, guns. Later, the gun was invented in the 13th century, I believe, and they were able to create infantry units that would shoot from far distances. They created a flint lock, which came much later, around 17th century, 18th century. By the time the Revolutionary War started, it wasn't until about the 19th century, Samuel Colt, they came out with better weapons where you didn't have to put the ball in the top of the rifle. It was all part of one piece, and you just put the bullet and fired. You didn't have to. It took 3 seconds to put the ball, and you had to take a piece of metal rod and stick it in there, then light it up. And then you had to put the powder in the breech and then fire, and that took 3 seconds. And some soldiers were better at it than others, but still took 3 seconds. But the minute Samuel Colt, I think, invented the rifle where you didn't have to, just put the bullet in the chamber, made warfare more efficient. There was less loading time, and people were able to kill each other more efficiently. Then it was just a matter of discipline by the soldier. Then later on, by the 19th century, by the earliest 20th century, by World War I, this was the turning point where new forms of warfare were developing very quickly. The invention of the submarine. But there's something about this. The submarine came around 1870, and a lot of people credit the Hundley. In point, in fact, in truth, the submarine was invented in Spain by Isaac Peral, and this is a known fact. You can look this up. A lot of people don't want to credit Spanish people, especially in the United States, because of that. So it seems this hatred between Anglo-Saxons and Spanish, or even Italians or Southern Europeans, still continues to this day. The war, they don't fight each other anymore, but the ideological war still continues. And so the 1870s saw the invention of the submarine. As a matter of fact, the Peral 1 was the first true submarine, carried 55 men, 55 sailors. Then later on, by World War I, battleship, the Dreadnought, bigger, heavier ships. Not too heavy because you don't want to slow yourself down, so they would design the ships and tried to create a ratio between speed and power. Sometimes you have a pocket battleship which could show you could deliver a lot of speed, but it didn't have a lot of armament, versus a battleship that was heavy, can carry a lot, but was a little slow, maybe 15 knots. Pocket battleship can go a little further, 25 knots maybe. And so some navies preferred certain types of design philosophy than others. And by the 20th century, the tank was invented. World War One. World War One introduced an explosion of evolution of new weapons. We created new warfares. The aircraft carrier, I believe, 1904. The USS Langley, I believe, was the first aircraft carrier, and that created the naval. That was the beginning of a new form of warfare within naval warfare. So you had submarine warfare, surface warfare, and so each warfare had other sub warfares. And one of the new warfares was naval air warfare, to deliver air power against another navy or against anybody, against a particular target. And the ability to deliver air power across the ocean was a very significant. Personally, in my opinion, by World War II, it made the battleship obsolete. But in my opinion, it was not obsolete. It would just work in conjunction. It would become a part of naval warfare, and I didn't think it made the battleship obsolete. As a matter of fact, the United States Navy held 4 battleships: USS Iowa. The other ones were the USS. I forgot the other 3. Missouri and the other 2 would not become obsolete until 1994, and that was 50 years later. So it was not obsolete, and the only reason why they decommissioned those ships was because of budget cuts. The Cold War came to an end. There was no need for a military budget or a high military budget, and the defense industry was no longer getting contracts from the government. So it was like a domino effect. And the Soviet Union wasn't much into naval. The only naval power they possessed was mostly submarine. They were more into submarine warfare. They had lots of submarines. They were not much into carriers. The Nazis were not into carriers that much, although they had the Zeppelin, but it was in the production stage. It was never went beyond that. Had they built it, they might have had an advantage to deliver air power against England or even attack the United States. They should have built a few pocket. They should have built some pocket aircraft carriers. The United States had plenty of pocket back here. The USS Hood, that was sunk by the Japanese, but they also had a few other ones. The Intrepid, I used to work in the Intrepid back then as a security officer. And so, the naval warfare would be changed forever. The jet aircraft came out in 1944, 1945. The Messerschmitt 262 changed the face of naval air warfare and air warfare forever, because now piston engines were pretty much obsolete with the Bearcat, the H-6H Bearcat were the last of the piston engine aircrafts. The Helicat, those were the last ones, and the Mustang, P2 Mustang, I think it was. And they all were obsolete by that time. They went pretty fast at 400 something, but the M62 and the rocket ME-163 were going at 500, 600 miles, very close to Mach 1. And unfortunately, it was developed too late in the war for the Germans to really have an advantage. They pretty much had this in the blue during the 1940s, during the blueprint stage. By the next stage, it wasn't until 42 or 43 they had it in production stage, and by 44 or 45 they had it in the the stage where the operational stage, when they actually built the aircraft and it's being assigned to a unit. That wasn't until 1945. So their timing was completely off. Had they had produced these weapons by late 30s, early 40s, the war would have been a whole lot different. They would have had an advantage. Had they been successful, would they have won World War II? I can't, I cannot. I can only speculate. It never happened. But had that happened, I guarantee you that the war would have been different. It may have taken longer for the United States to win, or it might have been, And then they had the V2 rocket and the V1 rocket, which was they call it the buzz bomb because it made a funny sound. And the V2 rocket was unstoppable, but it could not be produced in large enough numbers. And when the United States won, they took all that stuff. Most of the weapons we have today in the United States comes from Germany. The United States military has borrowed a lot of military hardware from many different countries. They owe their debt to Spain, Germany, a lot of great inventors in other countries. England too made their contribution. France. Okay. Well, I just wanted to say I don't want to get too much today. The United States is still a superpower. The Soviet Union later collapsed. They really didn't have, they mismanaged their economy, and I don't want to get into the political as to why. But eventually they collapsed in 1991. That was about the time I joined the Navy in July 2nd of 1991. By December 25th, they lowered the flag, and by January of 1992, the Soviet Union did not exist. It was now dissolved, and all the other republics were basically decentralized and became independent nations. Russia was being the largest, became independent, and then you had Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Moldova. They all became separate nations. Yugoslavia would follow suit. They would break up as well. So the communist world was breaking up, and the United States began to downsize its own military. There was no more military threat. They still had a budget, but their budget was not very high, so they focused more on domestic issues and for coastal regions or local wars. And maybe they went a little too far by downsizing way too much because, they got rid of a lot of personnel. I knew people who I spoke to on Facebook who said they joined the Navy in the 1990s and they were discharged in 9 months for no reason, not because of for infractions or not because of violations of UCMJ, not because of their performance, because they just couldn't afford to keep personnel. I think they should have kept all the personnel because I think the best smart weapon is the military personnel. Weapon systems, they can come and go. But you don't throw away a good personnel. What I mean by military personnel, I say regardless of branch, anybody in any branch of service, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. That's what I mean by military personnel, meaning that any military serviceman or service person serving in any of the branches of military. And the Russians took a long time to recover. They became very corrupt. They began to sell, in some cases, sell hardware illegally. And it wasn't until 2002 when Vladimir Putin took power that he was able to stabilize the country and end the corruption, or at least keep it at a minimum. And right now, now that the history, I've given a brief. I don't want to get too much into it. If you think I made an error, feel free to text in the comments and let me know what you think. I think I didn't want to get too much into it. I touched on the most important issues, and I touched on the most important facts. There are many truths, I touched on a lot of issues, a lot of basic historical truths. Not all of them, they would take me too long, but those were the most important that I picked, that I thought were the most important. The present condition of the U.S. military. I've been watching, and like I said, I am not an expert. If you disagree, feel free to comment. There's something wrong with the United States military, and this is just my opinion. Because of mismanagement, erroneous policies, deviation from tradition, and poor military budget, the military has degenerated itself almost to the point of being a paper. The United, when I mean is the United States military, not just the Navy, all the branches. Again, because of military mismanagement, uh, erroneous policies, deviation from tradition, and just budgetary mismanagement, military budget mismanagement, they have degenerated themselves, the United States military, and have become very close, if not already, a paper superpower. And I say that with tremendous regret. I'm very reluctant to, I'm a little reluctant to want to have to admit this as a United States Navy veteran, but I don't think the United States military has to change and go back to its traditional roots, and too much, you know, political correctness and social correctness, and we have to do this so we can cater to we have to show compassion to a certain group of people. Listen, the military is about defense. Is what works. Period. I don't want to hear Mickey Mouse nonsense. I don't want to hear sentimental nonsense. It's what works, and if you can't hack it, that's it. Now I'm saying there's room for flexibility. I don't think that everybody should be kicked out of the military. They should be given a chance, but I don't think that like for example, a good example is the gender integration. Look, men and women are different. I'm not saying a woman cannot be a good warrior, but they have to be trained separately. They are different in many ways, and you cannot expect a woman to do what a man does. Even the weakest man is stronger than the strongest woman. Even me being out of shape would still fare better than the strongest woman. That's in great shape. I think that that's one of the reasons. Another one is they uplifted a lot of different bands. Certain people that would have never been allowed to join are now allowed to join. The military training, like what they call basic training or basic combat training in the Army, but the Navy, Army, Navy, Marines, even the Marines are starting to get affected by this. The lowering of standards and just the gender integration, they're basically not putting out quality personnel, and this is going to have effect on readiness. Because the most important part of any military is military readiness and qualification. I don't think, and I'm ashamed to have to say this, but the United States military in general, not just the Navy, but the United States military, does not have the military readiness to fight a global war. And I really feel bad to have to say this. If we were to fight a global war right now, the most we can hope for, and the two common enemies is Russia or China. I would prefer to fight China, but Russians are very determined to want to win. They don't have much of a navy, but they do have a submarine force, and they have a pretty good air force. And their navy is still respectable. They still have the Akula class and the what's the other class they got? The Typhoon class submarines. And they got a pretty good surface warfare, surface fleet. They're fighting a war in Ukraine, which I will mention later on. I will mention this in a couple of minutes. But the United States military has degraded themselves very much, and it's very, very, I feel very. I'm forced to admit this, and I don't want to. I have to think my country is great, powerful. We are also degrading ourselves in many aspects, politically and economically. I don't want to get too political, but I think that needs to change. I don't think it's over yet, but if we continue on this road, if we sail in this direction, we will become a second-rate power. We will not say we are the ultimate superpower. I don't think we're ready to fight any country that is powerful like Russia or China, where they have caught up in many different ways. Russia has replenished themselves. They revitalized themselves after the 2000s. They have tremendous superior aircraft, the Su-27 Flanker. Now they're coming up with the Su-57 Felon, NATO codename Felon. Um, they're coming up with more superior aircraft, and the Chinese like to borrow stuff. Most of their hardware and aircraft is Russian made. Yeah, the Ju-15 is really the Su-27 flanker. And the first plane that they got in the 1960s under Mao Zedong, I think was the J. They created their own aircraft called the J-7, the Ju-7, I think it was, and that was actually the MiG-21 fish bed. So, yeah, for any of you history buffs, most of their aircrafts are borrowed. Now they're coming up with their own aircraft, and they're coming up with better missiles. The DF-15 that can go up to 250 to 300 kilometers, which is I think 500 miles. And if we were to fight a war with China, those carriers have to be at a safe distance before we can, first we have to attack everybody, knock out their communications, and knock out most of their fleet before we can send in any air power. Because one of those missiles where they hit an aircraft carrier, they can destroy it. The Russians the same way. I think the army. I don't know. I'm looking. I see this stuff on YouTube. I know a lot. I shouldn't be watching, supporting everything I see on YouTube, but not all of it is a lie. A lot of misconduct by personnel. A lot of sexual misconduct. People getting kicked out for ridiculous reasons, and it's happening at an alarming rate. Occasionally, sometimes, many years ago, people did things, but now it's gone out of control. Almost to the point that they're having recruitment problems, because nobody wants to join, and the ones who do join they end up getting kicked out. They just can't adapt to military life. Okay, now I'm going to get into my military experience. I joined the Navy in July 2nd, 1991. I joined on June 27th, 1991 in New York, and I MEP station, and I was at basic training in Orlando, Florida on July 2nd, 1991. I have to say I went in with problems. I went in physically in good shape. I think that's a very good thing. If you're going to go into basic training in any branch of service, including the Marines, which might be tougher, but you should go into the best shape possible. And I was physically in good shape. I prepared myself 3 months. I had a weight problem. So at that time, recruiters were very, they did things that they weren't supposed to do. And one of the things they did was they would train you, coach you, which is something they're not supposed to do. If you're not qualified, you're not qualified. You got to lose the weight. They would run with you, and train with you to get you the weight down. I also took some citric magnesium, which is a laxative to make me lose a lot of water. And so I don't know if that was a violation of his regulations, but hey, whatever, I could care less. I lost 30 pounds within a couple months, very quickly, and I was able to get into the weight. I suffered, weight, obesity issues all my life. But in order for me to join, I had to get within I had to weigh 174 and 22% body fat. And I just was able to get down to 174, and I was able to get into the 21% body fat. So I had a hard time. Unfortunately, I didn't have any relatives. My father was in the Air Force, but not in another country, in Uruguay. So he really couldn't tell me, give me any advice, and he gave me some brief advice, but nothing really. I couldn't know who to talk to about what to expect in basic training, so I had to figure it out on my own. So in 1991, I was in basic. I was assigned to Company C-146. I think one of the company commanders, that's what they call your instructor in Navy basic training, are called company commanders. They call them recruit. Today they call them recruit company commanders or something like that. Her name was Roper, and the other, there were two. One was a chief, one was a petty officer second class. Petty officer second class, her name was Roper. She was from Missouri, from what I remember, and the other guy was Satterley. I think he was from Florida. And it was very tough. I had a hard time adapting. I didn't know a lot of, I just couldn't get it together. And unfortunately, it is 8 week. At that time, it was 8 weeks, 8 weeks long, basic training. But the first week doesn't count, so it's really 9 weeks long. They call them P days: P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, which is in processing days. And then your basic training starts at 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, 1-5, respectfully, and then 1-6, 1-7, 2. I mean 2-1, 2-2, 2-3. Each the first number representing the week that you're in, and the other represents the day. And when it hits number 5, it starts again. And then after 2-5 comes 3-1, 3-2, all the way to a 3 day, which is the last day. On between P5 and 1-1, I think P5 to 1-2 day, because after P5 it started 1-1, 1-2, 1-3. Around 1-2 day, I had committed an infraction, a violation, basic training violation, which really, to this day, I regret what I did. I was standing on a watch for 6 hours, and during that 6 hours, I was not used to the long hours of staying awake. And while the company was at a swim class, I tried to stay awake. I just couldn't stay awake. I was drinking water, and then I justified putting my head for 5 minutes, and I kept justifying what I was doing, promising myself I was going to wake up. And then finally, I hit the deck and said, "I'll wake up in 5 minutes." I never did. And then the company commander, Roper, saw me and screamed very yard. She screamed very loudly at me, and there was no way out of this. I tried to tell her I was sick, but that was not convincing. It was unconvincible. Yeah. And she took me into the office when the class came back, and then I was assigned to the division officer, Chief Marsack, and he. This is where, at the time, I didn't think these things were appropriate, but as after basic training, I began to realize that some of the stuff that was said and done could have been. I could have criticized it. He was extremely hard on me. Naturally, what I did was wrong. I'm not denying it, but he also made certain statements that I felt I could have complained about if I wanted to. But he was Marsac. It's a French name, I believe. But he was I believe, what they call, a Hispanic, or what they call, from one of the Spanish-speaking countries. I think he was Mexican American or something like that, or he was Puerto Rican. I don't know what, but he made a statement. He asked me where I was from, and I said, I was born here. My parents are from Uruguay, South America. And he said, "Okay, well, you're Latino. Can't you get it together?" or something like that. And I felt that was inappropriate. I could have said something, but I just didn't want to get into any more trouble than I was. And so what happened was that at the end, I let it go. He said he wanted to kick me out and throw me into a 2 weeks back in training, but because I committed this infraction so early, I was very lucky and I was very fortunate and lucky. I committed it so early that they couldn't find. It takes 3 days to establish a new company. As recruits come in, they collect everybody and form new companies within 3 days. Because I committed this on the P5 to 1-1 day, another company took 3 days, and by the time they would get formed, I couldn't go there. So he couldn't send me back 2 weeks. So there was no company to send me back to. There was no company for him to send me to. So he decided to make an example out of me and kick me out of the division, send me to Division 6, to Company C147. And I got my bags, and he basically, because I couldn't do nothing right. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't turn left or turn right. I wasn't even shown this stuff, so turn this way or turn that way, or about face, and I would do it all wrong. And instead of him just showing it to me, he would just criticize the hell out of me, yelling. All they do is yell at you. I understand the shark attack is important, but you got to show. If the person doesn't know, show him. And if he messes up, then you give him a shark attack. You know what I mean? But I think there are certain aspects of the military that sometimes are wrong. They're impractical, but for some reason they continue doing it. So anyway, I got in, and I got my sea bag. I left the barracks, walked to Division 6, and I went to C-147, I presented myself. I saw Petty Officer Edward Grandel. He was Petty Officer First Class, E6, and very nice. He was a decent man. He told me that if I did that again, he's gonna ream me hard. He's gonna give it to me hard. I don't you ever fall asleep on watch. And I met the second company commander. He was a lot meaner. He was Chief Petty Officer. What was his name? Chief Petty Officer Willie Williams. He was from Tampa, Florida. Grando is, I thought was from Arizona, but he's originally from New York. He told me later on when I reunited with him on Facebook. And I had a hard time adapting, but slowly and surely I was able to get it together. Some of the other shipmates were helpful. They had parents who were in the service, and they already came prepared. They knew how to do certain things, and he showed me. One recruit showed me how to turn right, turn left, about face, pick up the rifle, hold the rifle. And because I was from New York City, I wasn't too popular. So I had a couple of recruits who I'm not going to mention their names. One guy I really didn't like. He had a real attitude problem. I'm not going to mention his name. I'd love to mention his name right now. But I really wanted to knock him out, And as a matter of fact, there was a couple other people that wanted to knock him out. But, he just... that was the way it was. I failed. We had a division inspection which didn't account. All division inspections were in-house. The ones that counted was the RCT. That was done by the Recruit Training Command from Naval, RTC, Recruit Training Command, and I failed the division inspection. It was the worst inspection because I didn't put on. You had your dungaree uniforms that we used at the time. You had a T-shirt. I forgot to put one on. Failed inspection, and everyone failed. They call it a red line. When more than 40 recruits failed in an 80-man, 80 recruit company, that is called red line. And everyone red line, but mine was the worst because I forgot to put on a T-shirt. And to this day, I laugh at it now, but. And then I remember my company commander, Grandel, telling me, you need to pay attention to details. And I took that advice, and I began to get better, passed my first RCT inspection. I passed all my RTC inspections, and I passed the physical inspection. I got very good, and I took that advice, I took it very seriously, and I began to apply it. And slowly I passed all the written tests, never failed a written test. I don't think I might have failed one, but you're given another chance, and I passed it. And we only had one swim test and one physical test. And because I think at that time it was only one test, you pass it. If you fail, you get to do it again. But today I think you have to pass 3 tests in today's basic training in Navy. You have to pass there's 3 tests, one in the early part of training, one in the middle, one at the end. At that time, it was just one. But we did a lot of physical activity before that time. Before that test, all throughout the 6 weeks, we were running. And at one time, we were doing 100 push-ups, 150. I had to do more because I was always messing up, But, we had a couple other, people who were messing up as well. That wasn't the only one. But I had gotten better, so I wasn't really considered a mess-up anymore. But I wasn't too popular. There was a lot of regional conflicts, sometimes even racial. Because my parents were from Uruguay, that people thought I was strange. I didn't know where Uruguay's from, where Uruguay is from. They were not familiar with the country of Uruguay. A lot of people thought I was Italian, which I have Italian ancestry. But I had a few other people that I had one guy kept calling me Fernandez. That's not my name. It's Hernandez. Stupid, yeah. But I had people who were knuckleheads, they just, and I had nothing against them, they would turn out to be. There's one guy I turned out to be a good person. He was from Florida, and he was a good man, he actually told me that you're a good man for making through this, you know. And I was, and I remember one bad moment when someone on the last day of basic training, A3, was kicked out because of a medical reason. I felt very bad. I felt so bad about him. You know, he went through it just like we all did, and you know, they could have, again, they could have worked around that. They couldn't have let him. They could have gave him 2 years and then get out. But you don't kick him out in basic when he was just making it through. You know, I mean, it's just not right. You know. But anyway, that's, you know, I made it through, and then I ended up going into the reserves until 1995, and I was having some health issues and personal issues, and I was a drilling reservist. I drilled once a month, 2 weeks a year. I was assigned to the John F. Kennedy unit, and it was a good experience. I would have wanted to go active duty, but I had certain issues that prevented me from doing it. I had a lot of personal and economic issues, and I just went in. I went in with basic with a lot of problems in my head, but I also had, you know, health issues. When I left basic, I was in the best shape that I can possibly be in, but I always felt a little weak for some reason. I gained a lot of weight back when I was a drilling reservist. I was able to finish my enlistment, but it was just, I always had a weight issue. But and so I became I was transferred to the IR until 1999, and that's it. But I will say that it was a good experience. I hope maybe one day I even have a weird, bizarre dream of re-enlisting again. Maybe possible in my 50s. I don't know. It's possible they might take people prior service. I'm trying to work on that. I hope maybe I can do it. Being prior service does help. Uh, but um, I'm, you know, lifting a lot of weights, trying to get back into shape. It's possible. You know, there have been people. There is one case. There is one case of someone in the army that is 57 years old that is in the army right now, and he joined. I don't know how he was able to join if he's over the age, but he was in the army in the 70s and early 80s. He decided to re-enlist at 57, and so if he can, why can't I? Why can't I? You know. So okay, so that's it for my military experience. And I want to give advice for young people joining the military. Number one, if you decide to join, research number one, the first rule, or, you know, the first strategy. Well, it's not a rule. You can do whatever you want, but basically, it's the best strategy to join the military. Rule number one. If you break this rule, you won't go to jail, but you're going to become a victim. You know, so rule number one: make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. You are serving the interests of the United States, whether it's righteous or not righteous, or whether it's moral or immoral. You know what I'm saying? If you do not believe in the politics or the foreign policy of the United States, then you shouldn't join. The United States military is the enforcer of foreign policy. What that means that they enforce the interests of the United States, and if you don't think it's correct what they're doing, well, you shouldn't join the military. Although, ironically speaking, there are a lot of people who are in the military who are there for many other reasons. A lot of people join for many reasons other than patriotic reasons. I guarantee you that I would be the amount of people who join for reasons other than patriotism is probably 70%, 80%. There might be some patriotism in there, but the amount of people who are in the military, and this is a number I'm throwing, it could be a margin of error of 20 to 30% higher or lower. The amount of people who join for patriotic reasons, maybe 20%. You know, maybe. Who are purely for patriotic, you know, they want it because they want to serve their country. You know. Many people join for a lot of different reasons. They join because of economics, to have a job, to learn a trade, or basically to get some economic, you know, government money, you know, the GI Bill. That too, you know. Some people join for many different reasons. Patriotism is just one reason, and it's not the most common reason. So make sure you know what you're getting yourself. If you subscribe to any conspiratorial ideas, I guarantee you that at least 40% of the, and this is just a number I'm throwing, it could be higher or lower, that number, that percentage. I guarantee you that 40% of the people in the United States military, regardless of branch, in the Defense Department, subscribe to some extremist idea. They're just smart enough to keep their mouth shut. So if you do and you don't have a problem being in the military and you subscribe to a extremist idea, keep your mouth shut. I subscribe to a couple of extremist ideas, but I'm not going to tell you here what I subscribe to, and I never did in the military. So I never did in the military, and I'm not going to tell you now. So, but they, again, keep your mouth shut. As far as your recruiter is concerned, whatever don't tell your recruiter, you don't tell him at MEPS. That's a simple strategy, good strategy. If you admit to something to your recruiter, and he's got to let his MEPS know. If he agrees with you and wants to coordinate with you, and he knows, but he doesn't, he tells you he's not going to put it into the application, then go along with it. What you don't tell him, don't tell MEPS. Because if you tell MEPS and you tell them, they're going to find this confusing, and then they're going to say that you do suffer from whatever condition or whatever the issue is, a past legal issue or even a disease or whatever. Keep your mouth shut. Now, if you tell your recruiter, most recruiters tend to be pretty flexible and pretty good at keeping secrets, especially when they want to recruit people. See, recruiters they want one thing. They want the perfect recruit, an ignorant, poor, and desperate. And right now, they're not doing too well. They're not getting the best recruits, so they're willing to be very flexible. If you got some condition, well, just don't. I never heard of it. You know what I mean? Most recruiters don't even want to hear about it, unless it's serious enough. But most recruiters would tell you, well, you know what? Why don't you I'll pretend I didn't hear that. You know what I mean? Unless it's very serious. But if it's not too serious, if it's a minor condition, if it is serious, then you might need to get a waiver. You know. But whatever you don't tell your recruiter, don't tell MEPS. Keep it that way. If it happens to develop later on, this physical or some other issue pops up about another issue, they didn't ask you. Don't ask, don't tell. And if it pops up, well, you already done your time in service. They can't take that away from you. But make sure you're getting to the best shape possible. I mentioned this before. I told you about my personal military experience. You keep it, get into the best shape possible, regardless of branch. Even if it's the Marine, I know the Marines are physically the most demanding. They have a higher standard when it comes to they're more physically demanding, but nevertheless, even the Navy and the Army are pretty underneath. They're underneath them. They're second place. They're tied for second place for that. If I would have joined the Army in the shape I was back in '91, I would have went through it very easily. The Air Force is being the easiest, and the Coast Guard. Oh, the Coast Guard now is just as tough as the Navy and the Army, if not maybe slightly stronger. Not, or even slightly more intense. I have to give it to the Coast Guard. I recently saw one boot camp experience in YouTube, and they were very, very intense. No messing around. What was it? So get into the best shape possible. Make sure all your affairs are in order. Don't go in with problems in your head. If you do, solve it. Because if you go in with problems, you're not going to be able to concentrate what you're doing, and you will. You can't afford to be distracted. In basic, you got to concentrate on what you're doing, on the physical and the academic standards in the military. I don't know what else I can tell. Keep your ideas to yourself. If you have some kind of an extremist idea, if you don't think, there's an old saying that I came up with. I make a lot of quotes on Facebook. When a military personnel joins the military, and when they leave, or during their service, or when they become a veteran, they end up realizing they weren't serving their country all this time, that they were serving a political end or economic end, that they weren't serving the people all this time, they were serving a political or economic end. that sounded like an extremist idea. Well, I like to explain that quote. I create a lot of quotes on Facebook. One day I'm going to present it here on Facebook. I mean, I'm going to present here on YouTube one day. I'll make a video about it. Sometimes that happens. A lot of people fought in the Vietnam War and they were very disappointed. They were all gun ho, which is a Chinese word that means to work together. You know, being basically a fanatical term. It's a fanatical term. You know. And then after the war, they became anti. You know, they became anti-war. You know, because they saw the horrors of war. I never was in combat, but I can, I can speculate on it. I can, I can do the next best thing. I can speculate. And then even in the Iraq War, by the time I finished basic training, the war was over. The war ended. I think around it started in August of 1990. So anyone who served in 1990, August of 1990, the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, until I believe 1992, 1993. But the war ended in, I believe, in June of 1991. No, actually August of 1991, somewhere around that period, and I was still in training, so I did get a National Defense Medal. But if a lot of people will become bitter, and not just during war, even during peacetime, I've seen videos on YouTube, women who were raped, men, people doing drugs, all kinds of murder, and it's becoming more and more common, and it's very disturbing for me to see these kind of things. Why these things are happening, I don't know. Oh, I do know. I'm not going to say on this video, but let's just say our country's doing a wholesale dying right now. We are headed for something very serious, and I don't want to get into the details of it. That's for a different video. But another thing, you have to understand what you want to do in the military. All this information has to be pre-informed. You have to know what you're doing. First, you have to know what you like. Do you like naval warfare? Do you like being on ships? Do you like wearing a uniform? Do you like saluting? These are very important things before you join. Do you like working on aircraft, like the Air Force, or working on an aircraft carrier during being in an air unit, air wing unit? They call it Naval Air Forces. Do you like being on an aircraft carrier? Do you like being a Marine? Do you like to be on a ship as a Marine, being on the LST or HLA? Yeah, auxiliary helicopter. What is that called again? LHA, yeah, helicopter assault. Sometimes they station Marines. Another thing, you should ask yourself these questions before. You should when you finish high school, you should take about a good 6 months, 3 to 4 months. Don't join the military right away. Think about it. Think about what you want to do. Go to every recruiter representing each branch and take out, get brochures, talk to veterans, ask them their experience, Think about which branch. Talk to different veterans who serve different branches, or sometimes certain veterans have served more than one branch, multiple branches. Sometimes I knew one guy who was in the Navy and the Army, or Navy and the Marines, and ask them their experience. Don't just talk to recruiters, because their whole job is to recruit, and they don't give a damn about you. They're here to fill a quota. They'll tell you anything, whatever. If they are truthful, if they are attempting to tell the facts, those facts don't last very long, because policies change very quickly, requirements can change. The tradition doesn't, for the most part, but they change. Yeah, and that's about it. I will say, another thing, elite units. I wanted to say something briefly about that. I watch a lot of videos on Navy's, one of the most powerful, one of the most popular and intense elite units in the world are the U.S. Navy SEALs. I've also watched Recon and things on YouTube. I knew about them from years. Um, if you're deciding to go into the military to be a member of an elite unit organization like the SEALs, Recon, Green Beret, or any others, a lot of one of the biggest misconceptions that they're all special forces. Special forces is the name of a particular organization called Special Forces. That's the Army. The Army has three, I believe. Green Berets, Special Forces, and Ranger. I believe there might be one more, but the Army being the biggest branch. The U.S. Navy is the U.S. Navy SEALs and SWIC. Marines are called Recon, and I believe the Coast Guard might have an elite unit. The Air Force has para rescue, and I think they might have one other elite. But not all elites are special. They're not all labeled special forces. That is the name of one of them. The proper terminology is elite unit. And what is an elite unit, elite organization? It is usually a command or an organization that does what the average personnel does not do. The kind of operations they conduct demand physical standards that are beyond the average personnel, physical and psychological for that matter. And I watch this channel, Extreme Experience, SEAL Extreme Experience, run by Don Shipley. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL. He joined in 1978, and then got into BUDS. And I graduated from BUDS in '84 and became a Navy SEAL until I believe until 2000 or something. Jocko Wills. Well, there's a guy named Jocko. He's another SEAL. I have nothing against elites. I don't. There's two extremes. I don't like phony, stolen valor people. They have a tendency to, a person that they call it making false military claims, or what they call stolen valor. People like that, they have a tendency to they disgrace the people who actually served, and a lot of people do it for many different reasons: jealousy, mental illness. The mental illness, some people are mentally ill. They want to believe they were something they were not, and you feel bad for them. And what happens is that people like that, there's nothing you can do about. But there are some people who consciously do this, and I really respect Don Shipley for exposing these people. But there's another extreme to this. You got people who are and most of the people who do this are actually veterans, not people who never served in the military, because they usually have a better understanding of the military, the institution of the military, and its inner workings and how it operates. They understand the military operations, military terminology. They have a greater understanding of the institution, so they can lie more effectively. But they always make the mistake when it comes to trying to make a claim that they were a Navy SEAL or some kind of elite unit, or they don't research it. So you got two types of stolen valor. One, the ones who are crazy. They say they were on the moon with the aliens and stuff like that. And then you got the other ones who lie more effectively. They research and are able to make a more convincing lie. They can make a more convincing claim. So they're able to cover up what they're saying. Cover up their lies, because until someone catches them in the act, and when they make this claim that they were this or that, until someone like Don Shipley does a little research and realizes that they're not who they say they are. They might have been in the Navy, but they were never a Navy SEAL or whatever their elite unit that they're claiming. They do the research, but they always fail because they miss out on a detail or two. But then you got the other, and people like that, they lie more effectively. They lie so much until it becomes the truth to them. When they get exposed, I think it's very funny, very, very sad at the same time. But and the ones who have no military experience, who never were even in the military, they're much easier to catch. Although some of them are very good at doing research, but we have military records. There's a website called POW Network, and also you can go to John Shipley's channel, SEAL Experience, Extreme SEAL Experience, and you can, you can ask him, or you have to pay him, I guess, and tell him that somebody's making a claim, and they can, they can confirm it for you. The other thing I don't like is the other extreme, and this is the people who are actual, authentic elite members of elite units, like the SEALs, who have a tendency to degrade people who were not in an elite unit or who never served in the military. You signed the contract, and that's just the way it is. You know what I mean? So there's nothing wrong with being proud of what you've done. I remember I saw a video of Don Shipley's "What Happens If You Fail Out of Buds," and he said that I would have never thought about it twice. Which I think he would have been. I think he's kind of not being very honest there, because if he didn't make it, he would have been just as upset as everyone else. Maybe he would have gotten over it. There were thousands of people who joined. Only 20% out of the every 100 guys, only 20% actually make it. 80% fail. Every 100 recruits, SEAL, Buds recruits, only maybe 20 make it, and 80% fail. 80 guys. And and then he started to go on and say, well, if you didn't make it through Buds, you can always go through SWIC, because they don't like doing push-ups. And he begins to say there's alternatives. You could try other branches of service or go into SWIC or some other elite unit. And he began to degrade the other elite units. And that's the part I disagree with Don Shipley. You really shouldn't be degrading other people. It's not right for you to do that. I understand the SEALs are, some people claim are the best in the world. But that's a matter of opinion, not fact. Green Berets and Rangers who can be just as effective, can be just as elite, and even from other countries. I believe there is an elite unit in Russia, and I don't know how to pronounce this. Let's see if I can pronounce this. Let me see if I can pronounce. I think it was called this. I think they call it a Spiknak or whatever. Let me see if I can pronounce this word. Damn it, man. Yeah, let me see if I can look this up. Yes, the Spitsnaz. The Spitsnaz is an elite unit of Russia, and some people say they're pretty tough. They're pretty intense in their training, and they seem to be very effective. And they also have airborne troops, special forces, Navy Spitsnaz, parafrogmen, special operation forces. So you got those kind of and then you got the French. They got their own elite parafrogmen. Everybody claims to be the best. It's hard to say. The SEALs seem to be claim to be the best because they are at sea. They conduct 3 different forms of operations: sea, air, and land. And so some people claim they conduct. Originally, they were the descendants of the UDTs, underwater demolition teams, which later formed in 1962 to become SEALs, until 1983 when the last UDT became SEAL Team 5 or something like that. And I think MOBSIC wasn't formed until 1980. So originally they were just basically sea, but they didn't incorporate the airborne until much later. Until the 1960s when John F. Kennedy formed the Navy SEALs. Sea, air, and land, so they were just basically sea. They basically, in World War II, they were UDTs. They would be like parafrogmen. They were underwater, blowing up ships. Very dangerous work. And by the 50s and 60s, and until about 62, they began to combine the UDTs and form SEAL teams. and they began to incorporate or apply other forms of warfare and other forms of operations involving air and land, light infantry. Basically, marching to getting off a helicopter, running 2 miles, conducting the mission, taking somebody out, whatever their mission was, and then running as quick. That's why they stress running a lot in buds. And then eventually they created another form, and then later on airborne warfare. They incorporated the airborne operations. As a matter of fact, airborne warfare came out of World War II. They began to realize the importance of getting a soldier out of the air and getting him on the ground. So that warfare may have started in World War One. So again, World War One was became was another, what do you call it? There were many. I mean, warfares and weapons, were invented all throughout human history. But I think World War One was the great leap. There was a great explosion of new forms of warfare and fighting and stuff like that. So anyway, that's basically it. So like I said, if you're a young person, be very careful about joining the service. Make sure. Oh, and one other thing: once you're in the service, try to do everything they tell you to do. Don't kill yourself, but do what you have to do. Cover yourself, protect yourself, because some people are sometimes not going by the rules. And once you finish basic training or basic combat training, and you finish, or the Marine basic or the combat, in the Marines you have to go to infantry school or the other. There's two types of schools that you go to. I think they call it School of Infantry, and then the other one is the School of Combat Training, whatever. I forgot what that's called. When that happens, make sure you continue doing what you need to do. But once you're done with all your schooling and you're in the fleet in the Navy or in the Marines, or if you're in your first unit in the Army or in the Coast Guard fleet or the Air Force, I don't know what's the proper terminology, but if you're done with all your schooling and you're assigned to a unit, make sure you protect yourself. Know the chain of command. Make sure you try to size people up. Try to be understand people's human moves, because there's a lot of people doing weird things, and especially now in the military. This is not a good time to join, to tell you the truth. This is not a good time to join. What the problem with that is that right now they're downsizing. There isn't much of there's not much time to join. I mean, there's not too much incentive to join, and most people, the military budget is very low. If there was a great war right now. So here, Marines, military, they have an MOS just like the Army. So the School of Infantry is where Marines go after Marine program to continue training as a Marine. The School of Infantry is divided into two different schools: Infantry Training Battalion (ITP) and Marine Combat Training. Marines in infantry system go to Infantry Training Battalion, and Marines without an infantry MOS will train at SOI, Marine Combat Training. SOI is where basic trained Marines become Marine warriors. So again, this is what they do. Every branch has its own path and how they train their recruits. Again, I hope I was very informative. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to text in the comments below. I hope I was very informative, and I hope I was able to give you a practical advice. And again, I want to thank every person that has ever in the United States military who's served in the United States military, who is a veteran or a combat veteran. Who is actively serving. Any anybody who is active, any military personnel who is actively serving on active duty or reserve, who is in combat or in non-combat, those veterans who served in peacetime or in combat, or any other, or those who have died either in peacetime or in combat. So I want to thank every one of them, and I want to salute them all for their military service. Well, until next time, I want to wish everyone on YouTube, all my YouTube members, good luck, and may God bless you all.